Okay, before we start, some housekeeping announcements to keep us all safe. Maintain at least a 1 meter spacing, okay, between individuals at all times. Mask up at all times unless you are consuming water. And just a gentle reminder, this is a one-way flow traffic. So we enter at the back of the auditorium and we exit at the front of the auditorium. And throughout there will be a Q&A time later in the session. However, you are welcome to start submitting your questions along the way. You can do that by scanning the QR code or going to the Pigeonhole URL and entering AVPN 2021 as a passcode. So feel free to keep your questions coming as we go along. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the first physical AVPN event in many, many moons. It is absolutely wonderful to see all of you here in the flesh. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our online audience tuning in from all over the world through the live stream. You can't tell from where you're sitting, but I'm actually a very tall person. I am Dorothy Cheng, and as I always like to claim, the best looking one on the AVPN team. AVPN is the largest network for social investors in Asia. What we do at AVPN is truly unique. Allow me to illustrate with this lovely orange here. Now, both Jane and John want this orange. So in typical traditional mode, we cut the orange in half, we give half to Jane, and we give half to John. However, Jane only wanted the rind to bake a cake, and John only wanted to eat the orange. So now both of them are stuck with only half of what they wanted or needed. For a greater win, we could and to please welcome the leader of our Orange Orchard, Nina Sabuar Batra, CEO and Chairperson of AVPN.
She's a hard act to follow, I have to say. The best looking person in AVPN and, with the orange analogy, I didn't know I was leading an orange orchard, but it's great to be here. It kind of scares me. I haven't been with so many people in one room for a long time. So I hope I don't get into trouble for being here, but a very warm welcome to our first in-person event in more than a year. Um, Looking at you even with masks, I can recognize a few familiar faces. So it's really, really nice to have you here. Before I start, how many of you here are actually AVPN members? Can you put your hands up? Wow, that's a fair large number. For those of you who aren't, I expect at the end of this session, you will sign up. Dorothy there can help you with how to join. So I hope you will. But for those of my friends who are not AVPN members, let me use this to tell you a little bit about us and what we do. Um, Kevin, I need to put this on. So there we go. Yeah, there we go. So one of my fellow speakers asked me this while we were sitting in the cafe that's across the way, saying, "How do you run an events business in the time of the pandemic?" And I was like, "Events business? That's not us. We do organize the largest social investment conference in Asia, but we are far more than an events company. And what are we? As Dorothy told you, we help allocate, reallocate capital towards impact. But our mission is really looking at how do you move capital towards impact? And they're a very different network because most networks look at bringing people together, convening, you're part of a network. But AVPN really believes in action and how do we actually move that capital towards impact. And when we talk about capital, it doesn't have to be financial capital, although that is oftentimes preferred. You're also looking at human capital, you're looking at intellectual capital. And why are we different? We are different from any other network because we bring uncommon people together. If you look around yourself today, You have a high concentration of family offices, you have a high concentration of people from financial investing today. But normally in an AVPN gathering, you will find policymakers, you will find corporates, you will find foundations, you will find people from private equity, you will find intermediaries, and you will find people that you normally will not be sitting next to in your run of the mill ordinary event. So AVPN really believes in breaking these silos down, bringing people from different backgrounds together, and people who deploy different types of capital. So we work across what we like to call a continuum of capital. So right from grants all the way to debt and equity. And then, of course, with capacity building in the form of non-financial support. How big are we? Wow, this always kind of warms my soul. We are now more than 600 members across, I believe it's about 44 countries. We are present physically, so there's an AVPN staff member actually present in 13 different markets across the world. We actually, and when I said we drive capital towards impact, our deal share platform has 380 plus investable deals. You can either choose to deploy a grant through that or make an equity investment or a debt investment. And we also work with government through our policy fellowship program. So we at this current moment have 18 policy fellows from across Asia. And these are some of our members. They're not definitely not all, and they kind of span all of those that segment. Since I have a captive audience, this is my sales pitch. So, if you are not there, you should be. Uh, as I said, we work across the continuum of capital. And for us, that's really important. When you're looking at scaling impact, it's important to start with capital that actually has a big appetite for risk. It can be the first loss capital that usually comes from philanthropy. You also have venture philanthropy, which is in our name, where you're looking at, capacity building that goes along with that grant. Then we move to impact investment, and then, of course, also socially responsible investment. So, what are our initiatives? As I told you, we're much more than an events business. We do a lot. This is what is one of our newest initiatives, which is the Private Wealth Hub. And if you look at the Private Wealth Hub, it provides a lot of things to people, to family offices. As all of us have probably read, Singapore is now looking to be the center of the world for family offices, and AVPN is trying to do its part in order to support this very, very important group. We also know that in Asia, some of the biggest amounts of concentration of wealth is held by family offices. And as that wealth transfer happens from the older generation to the younger generation, there is a lot of interest in impact. So we run fellowships, we have investor circles, we are putting together a service provider directory for family offices. We run impact measurement programs. We provide opportunities for co-investment through impact funds or philanthropic funds. So if you would like to know more, Komal, my colleague at the back, leads our private wealth platform, and she's happy to answer any questions you might have. We just recently, this year, launched a philanthropic pooled fund. And I'm really excited to say that in 4 months, we've raised $1.8 million in terms of philanthropic money that we are going to be deploying in grants across Southeast Asia and across Asia. We're going to be very different as grant makers as far as AVPN is concerned, because our desire is to give operating grants, to give unrestricted grants to nonprofits, because we believe that's where it's needed and that's where very few grant makers do. So again, it's an evergreen fund. We're looking to still raise money. If you want to look at deploying grants with others, please do come and join us in our philanthropic pooled fund. We also have launched a gender network this year. And again, if you look at it, for those of you who may be aware, Goal 5, which is the one that leads with women and girls, is actually the only goal that we've gone backwards in Asia. So our gender platform is looking at changing that, moving the needle the other way. We have at this point close to 26 members of our gender network who are each pledging a significant portion of capital towards improving the statistics around women and girls in their own countries. So we are, again, as I said, looking at how do we move capital towards impact. We've also launched the AVPN Academy, and two of our ongoing courses right now are we have an Impact Fellowship, which is running right now at this point. We are also running a Next Gen Leadership Fellowship in partnership with the BMW Foundation, which is also running. We will be starting our next Impact Investing Fellowship in July, which is going to be a hybrid cohort between people interested in impact investing from Africa and Asia. And we have, of course, events. The two of the newest, two of the most recent events that we're planning after this one is one with Withers, which is going to be around family offices and looking at how they can structure. And we are also going to be doing an event around impact measurement. We are in a partnership with the IMP program. So if you're interested in either of those, please do ask anybody from AVPN, and they can give you more details on how to sign up. And I'm going to stop there, hand it back to Dorothy. But that is about AVPN, and I hope I've done a good job of telling you why you need to be part of the most unique and only social investment network in Asia. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Nah. When I first met Mette 3 years ago, she had just arrived in Singapore, fresh off the boat. And the Northeast Family Office has come a very long way and really blooming. Please welcome our first speaker, Mette Ekeroth, Managing Director and Group Head of Philanthropy at the Northeast Family Office.
Apologize, there's a bit of logistics involved in this. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you. I think it's safe now. Well, thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Naina. Thank you to the AVPN team for the invitation today. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation, um, being a part of this distinguished panel, but also listening in to the questions and the conversation that we'll have in the panel and with you in the audience. So as Dorothy was mentioning, I'm from Northeast Family Office. We were established 7.5 years ago by the family that founded Pandora Jewelry. Our headquarters in Copenhagen, but we have an office here for the last 6 years actually. Started out as a PE setup, but moved into the more family services as well. Um, since our establishment, we've grown into a full service family office. Our founding families have gone from being 1 to 3. They're now based, two of them in Thailand, one in Denmark. And philanthropy is one of the most recently established services that we have in our family office. We're still very much on a learning journey, not just in terms of philanthropy, but also in terms of bridging and value aligning our deployment of capital from grants through more conventional investments. So our families have been involved in philanthropy for many years, both in their personal capacities and through direct giving and their own projects. Since 2018, we've been in the process of establishing more formal structures, philanthropic vehicles for them. Today, we operate a large foundation in Denmark, a foundation here in Singapore, 2 trusts, and we're in the process of setting up an additional foundation out of Singapore. The foundations are established under relevant legislation in the different jurisdictions. They have different geographical focus areas, thematic focus areas that are aligned to our respective families' interests. You can see them in the corner. We in Northeast manage the day-to-day operations of the different structures. This means that even though the focus areas and the geographical focus differ, we are the same people. It's the same team across who work for the different structures. We have the same infrastructure and we work from the same principles. Because the foundations draw on the same people, the same resources, we are better able to capture learning across the different structures, geographies, and thematic focus areas. We believe that that is propelling learning, development, and innovation across the way we do philanthropy. A key to our work is the clear belief that philanthropy has an important and unique role to play in catalyzing solutions to some of the most urgent and persistent social, economic, and environmental challenges. We believe that we, as private funders representing families, can carry a higher risk, that we can propel innovation, we can be more agile in our methods, and we can bring highly specialized competences to our partner organizations. Okay, that's interesting. What this slide was supposed to show was a bunch of faces. One more? Ah, there we go. This is Vinnie. Vinnie is one of the founding family members. She's also the founder and vice chair of the foundation in Denmark called Lilleborg Foundation. So the way we've set this up is basically we started out with her and a few trusted advisors from Northeast Family Office on the board. We have then expanded as the foundation has grown in size and capacity to include external experts as well. And this is the team that on a day-to-day basis manages the operations of the foundation. We are also involved in the other foundations, as just mentioned, but this is the mix that we have created with a governance structure with the family member, the founder on board, with trusted advisors from the family office and external advisors, and professional philanthropic capacities in the family office doing the day-to-day business. So while the project management is handled by the dedicated philanthropic team in Northeast, we draw on our other colleagues from the family office in our work with our partner organizations. Very often, our partner organizations are small NGOs or social enterprises. They struggle to either finance or in other ways access highly specialized resources and competences that we very often have in-house. So besides our internal resources, we also draw on external resources. So we leverage our network in support of our partners. Sometimes this is through discounted rates, and sometimes it's fully pro bono basis. The competences that we bring to bear range from finance, legal, IT, communication, strategy, public affairs, through investment and impact management. When we consider a financial commitment to a partner, we, whether it's in the form of a grant or a philanthropic investment, we do a holistic assessment of the need for other kinds of support as well. So this is an example of how we do this in practice. This is a case from 2018 when the Danish Foundation was contacted by a founder of a organization, a young organization in Denmark called Mentorbarn or Mentor Child. At that point in time, Mentorbarn was only the founder and her board. So it was very early stage. Mentorbarn had committed or had developed a method for creating highly bespoke matches between children in care, placed in care by social services and institutions, usually removed from their families because of neglect, abuse, substance abuse. And so the idea was to match these children with other families, basically voluntary, resourceful families. And by providing these voluntary, lasting, and loving relationships, Mentor Child believe that they can enhance the well-being, the access, and the essential life skills of some of the most vulnerable children that we have in Denmark. and hence minimize their risk of homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse, and economic marginalization. If successful, an early investment in mentor child could pay back hundreds times over in public savings over the lifespan of a child. So we entered the partnership with Mentor Child when their model was still at the pilot stage. Um, Besides a 2-year grant commitment, we allocated budget for us to draw in external resources in support of Mentor Child. And we created a risk reserve to cover expenses incurred by the organization in case of bankruptcy. In addition to the funding, we provided support on the organizational strategy, initially taking an observer seat on the board, commissioning external consultants to work with them on developing their business case and value proposition as an upfront investment for municipalities. We mobilized internal competences to review their entire IT setup, and we gifted pre-used Macs to their office. We helped quality check their accounts and persuaded our auditor to work with them on a pro bono basis. Our legal counsel conducted a full data protection review, and our external lawyers developed contracts for them to use internally and externally free of charge. We used in-house communication resources to develop content for their various materials, and we covered the cost of their participation in in several key national decision maker events. And we participated at government and municipal meetings, leveraging the funder role in support of the organization. So this is an example of what that looks like. This is the previous corporate visual identity in the top left corner. And the one below is the one we helped develop for the organization. So we utilized internal communication competences, and we used external partners, graphic design and concept development to create a multifaceted corporate visual identity for a more professional representation of mentor child. We also helped develop a short video and a social media campaign, which generated more than 600 potential volunteer families in its first run. So what's come of this significant investment, both in terms of funds and resources? Mentor Child is today an organization with core capacity to function and fulfill its mandate. They've entered into contracts with 6 municipalities. They've received a very positive evaluation from the Danish Center for Social Science Research, and they've been a key voice in getting voluntary and lasting relationships for children in institutions into Danish legislation. But progress has been slow on other fronts, partly due to COVID-19 and countrywide lockdowns. Only 3 of the targeted 40 children have been matched under our grant. Focus and leadership has been left wanting, and a strategic and organizational overhaul is underway. A financially sustainable model is yet to be developed, but there's interest from the Danish government's Social Investment Fund to pilot a social impact bond with Mentor Child. The foundation's partnership is up for evaluation towards the end of the extended grant period in September this year. And any future commitment from the Danish foundation, our foundation, is depending on further success in matching children to mentor families and to the strategic and organizational overhaul of Mentor Child. So what have we learned from our partnership with Mentor? We're just presenting 4 key takeaways here. I'm sure we've learned much more than this, but these are definitely top of the list. We believe that the additional support from internal Northeast and external competences have been key in the rapid development and professionalization of the organization, from a one-woman shop to a prominent and respected voice on children placed in care. But we also recognize that we can only have a limited number of this comprehensive and resource-intensive partnerships at any given time. We need to carefully map and match needs with internal and external resources in a realistic way when taking on partnerships like this. Risk, that's an integral part of most projects, not least when entering a partnership at the pilot or proof of concept stage. While we could not have foreseen a pandemic, we could have systematically mapped other risks and considered potential mitigation earlier on. Social change never happens in a vacuum, and for an intervention like Mentor Child to work, a number of external stakeholders need to buy into the model. They need to allocate budget and resources, and they need to actively participate in the implementation. Going forward, we aim to front-load dialogue with the key external partners, understanding their realities, their constraints and incentives, and more actively involve them in the design of the intervention. And lastly, true impact takes time. While most interventions fairly quickly can document outputs and outcomes, the impact of an intervention can take a long time to materialize. In the case of Mentor Child, the impact of the intervention will require full lives lived by these children for us to truly understand and document the positive impact. And similarly, document the financial upside to municipalities and government of investing in an early intervention like this. While much can be done in terms of early measurements and proxy indicators, very often it takes years and decades to capture the full impact. And partners, not least potential paying customers or social investors, need to understand that, and it needs to be taken into account when designing the project. As you can see, we're still on a learning journey. We're dealing with complex social, economic, and environmental issues, and there will be successes and failures along the way. We're committed to continuous learning and to working with like-minded partners to make an actual dent in these issues that matter to our families. And we're currently hiring. I wanted to put in that plug. So if you want to be a part of our team and our journey, we're looking to recruit an ESG analyst and impact investment manager, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mette. Our second speaker is from the Vision Catalyst Fund. This fund aims to catalyze investments in vision care to eliminate poor vision from the world within a generation. Please welcome Jayan Uvaragan, the founding board member of Vision Catalyst Fund.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Well, after a year of doing Zoom conferences and speaking to everyone through my best friend, my dear computer terminal at home, it's really surreal to be present today in front of a live audience. I'm kind of nervous because it's been like more than a year and a half since I spoke in front of a live audience. So it's great. And thank you very much, Nena. And thank you, AVPN, for making this happen. I really feel very optimistic, and now I can see the light at the end of the tunnel with all the vaccinations underway and all of us hoping to start traveling. That's great. I see many of us are wearing eyeglasses. Can I request you to take them off for a second? Thank you. You guys are really a sport. Can you try and do something which you do normally? Say, read the brochure or an iPhone in front of you. It's just some fun stuff, yeah? Well, for many of you, it's not easy, right? Certainly not. For me, I'm blind without my glasses. So it's probably my closest friend, much more closer to me than my dear wife. Eyeglasses have really become an integral part of our lifestyles, the integral part of us. We practically take them for granted. Imagine if we didn't have eyeglasses, what would we have done? How would we have read? Would we have achieved what we have achieved today? How will we drive? How will we learn? How will our kids learn? And what will life be? And more importantly, how would we have spent the last 12 months in a lockdown at home without vision and without eyeglasses? Unimaginable, right? Well, I can tell you that we in this room are a privileged few in the world who have access to eyeglasses. This is true. Uncorrected poor vision is the world's largest disability, which affects more than one third of the world population. It's a fact which not many of us know. By 2050, in the next 30 years, the world will be 10 billion in population, and it's expected that half of them, 5 billion, will be myopic. It's coming due to the cost of development. And if you add to that, anyone above 40 will anyway need some form of eyeglasses to do some near work. Roughly 75 to 80% of the world will have poor vision. Our own dear Singapore, well, is the myopia capital of the world. 80% of our children in schools have myopia and they wear eyeglasses. So that's really the size of the problem of uncorrected poor vision, which is not easily understood or appreciated because it's something which people take it for granted. There was a study done many, many years back, and it is estimated that simply due to uncorrected refractive errors, which is like lack of wearing eyeglasses, the world loses $272 billion in lost productivity. So for the economists in the room, simply said, if you put glasses on noses of people who need them, you increase your economic productivity, i.e. the GDP of the world, by $272 billion. It's a no-brainer, right? The reward is much higher than what the investment one has to do in making eyeglasses available. But you know, the good news is that unlike other pandemics or diseases or disabilities, we don't need to spend billions of dollars to go around investing in a new molecule or a new vaccine because simple, affordable solution exists today. You can get eyeglasses at less than $5 in retail, wherever it's needed. The products are available. All that we need to do is to make sure that there is enough awareness, especially on people who have poor vision, and there is enough equitable access to the people who are poor who could have access to eye health, correction, and eyeglasses. This is what we need to do. It's a problem that's easy to solve. And at the Vision Catalyst Fund, we are working on this journey to eliminate poor vision from the world in a generation. We have a dream that by 2050, not one person in the world will have poor vision and everyone will have correction with eyeglasses or other forms of uh, medical requirements that may be. So let's dive into some quick facts. As of today, the world of population of 7.5 billion people, it's estimated that 2.5 billion of them, one third, have uncorrected poor vision due to refractive error or lack of eyeglasses. Poor vision is often misunderstood as an isolated health issue. It is not. Poor vision has an impact on an individual's life, and it's a huge socioeconomic impact. If you imagine a garment worker in, say, Bangladesh, as his vision goes down, his earning power goes down, and there'll be a time when he will lose his job. When he becomes presbyopic and he can no more sew the needle, he'll lose his job simply because he didn't have a $2 glasses with him to correct his vision and work on a textile mill or sewing machine or whatever that he's working on. And you can relate this practically to every single profession or vocation. And that's the impact of poor vision. It was estimated that to solve this problem in, say, 30 years, the whole world, industry, and I'm a big proponent of business playing a big role in social good. So it's businesses, corporates, governments, every one of us, over a span of 30 years, we need to spend $14 billion to actually solve this problem, which is nothing when you see that $14 billion over 30 years is about $350, $360 million a year. And what the world will gain due to increased productivity is 19 trillion US dollars. Again, a no-brainer, right? I mean, in terms of the investment and the returns, what we'll gain on purely on the economic front, in addition to all the socioeconomic benefits that we'll gain for all the people who will be wearing eyeglasses. We also know that good eye health is really the golden thread for meeting all the 17 SDGs. I cannot imagine that you would meet any one of the SDGs with anyone having poor vision. Let me take the example of SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. And if you see that when glasses increase the productivity of everyone who works with good vision by 25% to 35%, obviously there's a direct link between increasing economic productivity and good vision. When you look at my favorite, the trend, that number 10 and number 5 on reducing inequalities and gender equality, we know that women represent more than two-thirds of the blind people. And it's likely in many of the developing countries, most of the women, at least half of them, will go uncorrected because nobody pays attention to them. And this is a huge one, and it just needs the correction of the 200 rupees or $5 eyeglasses. Similarly, children, this is again a no-brainer, children with vision impairment are likely to fall down in their class or fail 3 times more than children with good vision. And that's why you find most people term children as duds or non-performers without no understanding that all that he or she has got a problem is that he can't see a blackboard or a whiteboard wherever he's in his class. And that's why he loses attention. So that's the kind of impact which eyeglasses have or good vision has on the SDGs. I, for one, feel that two things need to happen fast in this context. The first, I believe that we need to create a finance revolution in vision, which blends finance in ways that up till date have been only nascent. I know that Kevin and many of us are trying to come up with newer innovative finance models. And I really think that's the need of the hour. And we need to reinvent, go back to our drawing boards and come back with newer finance models to catalyze investments in vision. And of course, in other sectors which need them as well. I'm a proponent of vision, but you can always do this in every other sector in terms of bringing the revolution in finance. Secondly, I think there is a need to scale up all our actions fast. For far too long, the NGOs and the sectors have been too small, trying to do work in silos and trying to do work with limited budgets and limited thing with great minds and great people behind them. It's time for us to come together, especially the big corporates, the governments, and every single stakeholder to actually bring scale here. It's time to connect the dots and work collectively, put the costs up in front, not so much as our individual company logos or what we do, because that will always follow. And I think it's time to put the cause in front. And this is what the Vision Catalyst Fund aims to do. Well, I missed one slide. I'll probably go to that before I come to the Vision Catalyst Fund. So I also think that the COVID has taught us a lot of lessons. It's given us a unique opportunity to advance the cause towards sustainable development goals and vision. And there are four things which I look at. First of all, I think when COVID struck, many governments realized how underfunded public health was. And many of them, and all of them, did not hesitate to increase the public health spend by putting in more money, by borrowing, by reallocating spends, etc. And some countries have gone to the extent of spending over 20 to 25% of the GDP on COVID, fighting the pandemic and increasing public health spend. My only dream is that as we fight and kill this pandemic and we come out of it, we don't go back to our old ways. Governments have realized how underfunded public health is, and I hope they will continue to keep spending on public health, and because that's the backbone of any civilization. Similarly, the pandemic has forced us to come up with a lot of new innovations. Innovation in digital and last mile solutions have been accelerated in eye care. For instance, I know there are lots of technologies now which uses artificial intelligence, imaging technologies, and as well as medical diagnostics to do the first level screening and diagnostics with the help of AI and diagnostics. So I hope that trends will continue, and this will help us to increase equitable access to everyone around the world. Technology is a great leveler. It's the same for the rich and poor. And my dream is to actually make sure that this technology includes everybody and all the people in the world have access to good vision thanks to the technology. Well, of course, there's more than ever, there is need to empower people with visual impairment and get them back to work and be an inclusive society, which is absolutely necessary. And lastly, I think the COVID has also shown the need to invest in primary healthcare. we don't have, in many countries, we don't have qualified super specialists and doctors who can go to villages and work. The primary healthcare network is the backbone of most of the developing countries. In eye care as well, primary eye care is really the backbone. Because if we wait for qualified people to come, we will end up losing one generation, and then that will be really a lost cause. We really need to strengthen our primary healthcare and primary eye care network. So I believe that through all this, we can definitely build back better after COVID-19. And like I said, keeping all this in mind and keeping the need to actually accelerate and innovate financing mechanisms and build partnership, the Vision Catalyst Fund was born. The Vision Catalyst Fund is on a mission to bring vision services to 1 billion people around the world within a generation by using catalytic financing tools. I would now like to show you a very short message from the CEO of the Vision Catalyst Fund, Dr. Astrid Bonfield. She lives in the UK, in London, and she's shared a very personal message with you.
Executive of the Vision Catalyst Fund. So the Vision Catalyst Fund was set up inspired by the work of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, where I was chief executive, a charity set up by the Commonwealth to celebrate the Queen's, at that time, 60 years on the throne and as head of the Commonwealth. We had one mission, and that was to create a positive impact for citizens across the Commonwealth. And to achieve that, we chose to focus on vision. What we learned during our 5-year programme was that we could make a dramatic impact on people who couldn't see. And inspired by that work, a group of organisations came together for the very first time to see how we could tackle the fact that more than 1 billion people in the world can't presently see, and how we could bring them vision within a generation. So Standard Chartered Bank, UBS Bank, Law, the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, and philanthropist James Chen all came together to see what we could do to create new innovative financing structures that could bring vision to the world within a generation. You have one of our founding board members speaking to you today more about how we plan to raise the $1 billion initially that we want to put into bringing vision to the world. And I wish you the very best in your deliberations. Thank you.
So the Vision Catalyst Fund has 4 main objectives. The VCF will utilize financing mechanisms that unlock capital to support vision programs as a part of their wider health system. The VCF will also develop and fund government-driven vision programs working across different sectors, not just vision. The VCF will also use market-based solutions that integrate glasses to support job and business creation. And finally, the VCF will convene and coordinate different non-traditional actors to help tackle the vision crisis. Essentially, the Vision Catalyst Fund will create a platform that will act as an intermediary for initiatives all over the world, working with proven organizations and institutions that can deliver change at scale. Our unique value proposition is based on creating a series of financial tools that can allow proven solutions to grow, support organizations in a new and innovative ways to flourish. I'd like to talk to you about our pilot program now, which is called the Vision Entrepreneur Bond. Just to give you a context, well, we're picking the pilot right now in India. India has a population of over 1 billion people. And in India alone, there are 550 million people with uncorrected refractive error. And most of them live in rural areas. That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem in India which have is that, well, it's not a problem, it's a situation, is that it's a very young population, and most of them are based in rural areas. They are educated, but they are unemployable, and they're unemployed or underemployed, and they're always looking for jobs. So we have this unique situation of, and they are quite entrepreneurial, I would say. So what we want to do through the Vision Entrepreneur Bond is to actually set up a pay for results model where we want to train and create 3,500 vision entrepreneurs in 3 states of India. We'll do this by working with skill development organizations and training them to become micro entrepreneurs. So this is the bond that we have got. It's a $6 million pay for results model, which will give vision services to 70 million people in 3 states. Well, we've tried to simplify this pay for success model on this chart, and I'll try to explain this to you quickly. So basically, the Vision Catalyst Fund will be the nodal agency. which contracts with different stakeholders. We have investors who will provide for funding, upfront funding for creating these micro entrepreneurs. We have service providers, which are skill development organizations recognized by the National Skill Development Organizations. What they do is to mobilize youth, women and men, young boys and girls, bring them to training centers and give them a comprehensive training with a degree from a university to become vision entrepreneurs. At the end of the training, we provide them seed capital to go back to their villages and to start their own micro enterprise, which we call iMitra in this case. Mitra meaning friend, friend of the eyes. They'll start iMitras in their own villages and become entrepreneurs in their own right. And then this is evaluated by an evaluator. And then once we meet the objectives, the outcome payers pay the money for that. So that's really the model. And of course, it has impact on the 4 SDGs. I'm just moving on to my last slide. Sorry. So this is pretty much my last slide. So that's really the program that we want to run, the first of the pilot program. We have lots more details. And if you guys are interested in Vision as a cause, there are a number of ways that you can get involved with the Catalyst Fund, either by becoming one of the partners for the Vision Entrepreneurs Program or joining our leadership board by becoming founding partners. Or if you have programs running in your own territories and you want to have vision screening done, we can come and do it with your help, with your volunteers to actually bring good vision to everyone. So really, these are our current partners today who work with the Vision Catalyst Fund. And as we are on this journey to eliminate poor vision from the world by 2050, I'm really hoping that all of you will join us to join with us to reach this milestone. And likewise, we'd like to work with you in different causes that you have got, which can actually help us connect with each other and work for the greater good of this world. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry to have taken a couple of
Jayan. Our third speaker will discuss the rise of innovative giving models such as the Social Impact Guarantee, SIG, using the recently launched SIG in partnership with YMCA as a case study. Please welcome Kevin Tan, the founder and CEO of Trisector Associates.
Hello, everybody. Great to see you. Very nice to see some familiar and new faces in the audience. And it's great to follow Jayan and Mete. You know, I think from Mete you heard the desire of family officers and the ability to give more and give better. And I think from Jayan you heard the need to connect all the dots. What Trisector is trying to do is to give the how, to connect this desire and that need using new models of giving. So what I'd like to do today is just share 3 things. Firstly, why it is that there's this need for philanthropy to evolve its models of giving. Second, some examples by which we've actually tried to adapt these to Asia. And then finally, actually something that could be done together, if you're interested. So what do you see? That didn't quite turn out as planned, but what you see around the world is that there's a huge intergenerational transfer of wealth occurring. Whereas baby boomers used to hold the wealth, there's a transfer of wealth to millennials. And in most surveys done by the large wealth managers, millennials are only about half as willing to do checkbook philanthropy as their fathers. So that said, millennials are very willing to want to give more. So that's manifested in a desire to kind of do active philanthropy, to take their giving and to not just give and forget, but to contribute the sort of skills that you heard from Mete, to pay attention to the outcomes, and to make sure that every dollar they give really has impact. But here's the harsh truth. If you look objectively at philanthropy and its role versus government, philanthropy is still a drop in the bucket. So what you see here are the social sector expenditures by sector in Singapore, across social, health, and education. The big bar is government, the small bar is philanthropy. And I could replicate this chart in most of the geographies that you'd think about. Basically, government spends between 4 to 30 times what philanthropy does, depending on issue area. So no matter how philanthropy wants to play, we could allocate philanthropy better within itself, but we've got to find a way for philanthropy to play smarter, to get from the small bar and influence the big bar. Otherwise, if you just give, that that will give and then sort of disappear, right? So what I'd like to share are different ways in which we've tried to build that staying power in philanthropy. I first started this journey about 6 years ago, back when I was in the US, when I saw how the Americans were trying to adapt some of the British innovations to the US. And about 4 years ago, I had the chance to come back with the support of the EDB to see how we could take some of these tools to adapt to the Asian context. So we're a nonprofit in Singapore that helps to work with different funders to make these happen. And I'd like to share 3 examples today. First, a pay for success project in Hong Kong. That's the first one in Greater China. Second, a guarantee in what we're calling social impact guarantee with YMCA, and which we're working with the Vision Catalyst Fund on to do a second round. And then finally, something called the Maybank Momentum Grant, which we've worked with Martin here from the Majority Trust to do. So in short, we basically help people come up with these new cross-sector collaboration models, measure the impact, and develop innovative philanthropy. And we do so end to end. I won't go into this too far. So let's talk about this pay for success model, which I think Jayan already brought up just now, and Mate's mentioned that they're doing in Finland. You know, the question is, what's the value add of this kind of model in a context like Singapore, where actually the state has money, right, and has traditionally been funding things. And you know, many of you have come from the private sector, so you recognize that in the private sector, when we ask for innovation, actually all the innovations that we're familiar with, Grab, Uber, etc., they've all gone through a very systematic process of development. And not just are they developed on their own, but rather there's a whole supporting ecosystem around them, providing both money and capability building, starting with angel funders, seeding the idea, venture capitalists, developing that idea, and then after that, the IPO. Now, in the social sector, there has been money in Singapore and in contexts like Hong Kong, but that money has traditionally been on both ends of the spectrum. So on the one hand, there's been philanthropic money providing the angel funding, and on the other end, there's been government subvention providing its sort of IPO. What's new is that there's this new class of impact investors or venture philanthropists who, like Mate's family office, can contribute not just money, but also skills to play that venture capital role, to really build out organizations and their solutions. So in short, here's the simple way in which a pay for success project works. Upfront funders like that put in the risk capital, but beyond that, also provide all of the additional support that Mate mentioned. The providers try things that never have tried before, and then if and only if it works, the government repays the money. And why you would want to do this is so that that small amount of philanthropy can influence the resource allocation of that big amount of government spending. And imagine if you could then take that money back as philanthropy and do that over and over again so that you could have more impact. So to give you an example of what we did in Hong Kong, one big problem is about 60% of Pakistanis and other ethnic minorities live in poverty. And the issue there is that many of them don't speak the local language. So when they go to school, they're not too sure what's going on. And so they, much like the kids who kind of have uncorrected vision, they get classed as poor learners, there's an integration gap and achievement gap. So over there, we worked with Oxfam Hong Kong that was providing early childhood intervention program to close this language gap. And using the pay for success model, we brought in about 4 different funders to scale up this program up 10 times in a much more cost-efficient way, with the goal of then being able to demonstrate these outcomes to government and then having them pick it up if it succeeds. And if it works out, the funders will then get their money back to try over and over again for the next program. So from the outcomes funder side, they did this because they wanted to bring in society to see what works. From the upfront funder side, it was a way to pioneer new types of high-impact philanthropy. And from service provider side, they wanted to do this so they could try something new that works. So this is, in short, this pay for success model, if you think about the staying power of philanthropy, what we're trying to do is use that small amount of money, exit to the big amount of money, and try over and over again that way. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use the difference in knowledge to guarantee impact and to also make sure that every dollar is well spent. So here's something we did with the YMCA recently. So the YMCA, you know, when you and I go out to buy something that's very new, say you want to buy a new Dyson vacuum cleaner that's expensive, you might be hesitant because you're not sure whether it works. And one way people convince you is they say, hey, look, if it doesn't work, you can get your money back. So What if we could do that for philanthropy and philanthropic organizations, where we could give a money-back guarantee on interventions that we really believe work, say Jayan's intervention that actually saves money down the line. So that's what we're doing at the YMCA. Here's how it works. A donor gives money to a service provider like usual. We'll then have a guarantor, a third-party guarantor, come up and say, I will give you the money back if it doesn't work. I'll provide a money-back guarantee. The provider does the service as planned. A third-party evaluation rigorously measures whether the outcome is achieved. And if it doesn't work, that money gets returned. If it does work, the money is spent as planned. Now, basically what this means from the donor's perspective is that every dollar is spent on an outcome. And from the guarantor's perspective, not only can you influence the allocation of resources of donors and governments without even putting in your money, right? You can then invest this money somewhere else to generate returns. So the leverage factor in terms of philanthropy is very high. So in this particular case, the YMCA will be doing this on a youth at-risk program that they've actually tried for 10 years now. And what they want to use the guarantee to do is to take that to the next level and aim for higher impacts with a few different interventions. I can share more details later if you're interested. So that's another way in which you can get leverage from your philanthropy, which is to use that to allocate other people's resources using guarantee. Now, the last one I'll share is recyclable grants. So what if we could get the money back through other ways? And so what we're doing here with Maybank Momentum Grant is it's a $2 million grant fund that's a recyclable grant fund launched by Maybank. What they do is that they provide 4 months worth of operating expenditure to small charities that have been hit hard by COVID. And those charities need not just emergency cash, but also capability building to turn around and pivot their business model. So when the charity then pivots, that allows them to sustain, and in future, those grants can be used to replenish the original fund to do this over and over again. So in this particular case, we worked with Majority Trust and Maybank to design this recycle grant fund, because you might imagine there are many questions of, will charities actually take such a fund? How do you design it? What are the terms and so on? So that's another way in which you might have staying power. Now, here are just 3 different ways to get involved. What really excites me about this space is that I think in Asia especially, we can start from first principles. There's so much to be done, and we're only just discovering things. Here's an example of a project that's still underway. So in Singapore, persons with disabilities, I think, have been well taken care of by the government, especially at the lower end of the spectrum. But actually, there are many high-skilled persons with disabilities who are good enough for school, who graduate from university, but aren't good enough for work. They can't get through the interviews. They can't hold on to a job. And most employment programs today tend to focus on the lower skilled groups. But the higher skilled groups, people with autism spectrum disorder, for example, who could actually do some jobs better than we can, the neurotypical people can, don't get those kinds of jobs. And we've heard from some providers on the ground that they got 50 to 60 graduates every year desperately calling them, saying, how do I get a high-skilled job that's right for my needs? And they have to turn them away. So what we're doing here is we're working with a provider called Trampoline, that's a spin-out of A-Star, one of the manufacturing research organizations. Because it turns out that in the manufacturing sector, there's actually a lot of need for new manpower. And there are many jobs in the manufacturing sector that require a lot of repetitive work, where actually people with autism spectrum disorder do great. So what Trampoline does is they help the autism spectrum disorder individual get a job, but also beyond that, train them and help them have a career, just like you and I. So not only do they start with there, but they then skill up over time and eventually progress to other jobs and increase their income. So what's unique about, I think, this type of solution is that it starts from a business need, so that kind of placement is sustainable. So this is my last slide. In this particular project, a set of upfront funders will provide about $380,000 in funding, so that Trampoline can try this really unique model that I think hasn't really been done in this part of the world before. Trampoline will serve about 80 different persons with disabilities over 2 years. And if and only if we manage to achieve certain employment outcomes and retention outcomes, then the outcomes funders, in this case, one of the government agencies, will repay the upfront funders their initial money. And that money can then be used to recycle over and over again and change the way the system works. With that, let me leave you. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions. But I'd be very excited to hear from you, what it is that the problem is that you have in terms of wanting to do high impact philanthropy. And then from that sort of problem first approach, think about what sort of new models might fit. Not just those that are around the world, but also things that could be designed with an Asian context in mind. Thank you very much for your time and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kevin. We will now move into a panel discussion to be moderated by Naina. A reminder to submit your questions as we move along through Pigeonhole Live. Remember to upvote your questions, and the ones with the most votes will be answered by the panel.
Okay. I think that was really interesting, and I don't know if you guys noticed. It's we started with the family office. We actually went to a corporate and what they were doing for impact, and then we came to Kevin, who talked a lot about pay for performance. So I'm gonna start with one round of questions, and I'm already seeing questions come up on Pigeonhole. So then I'll go quickly to your questions. Since we have these social distancing rules and we can't share mics, the only way for you to post questions is through Pigeonhole. So please do use that. I think one of the questions I'd like to ask you, Mete, is how you talked, which was interesting, even in the example you shared with us in the presentation. Outcomes was really important, and you're looking at reevaluating the grant and whether you continue depending on outcomes. So how is the family really looking at measuring the outcomes? How important is that in your decision around philanthropy and philanthropic giving?
So I would say it's really important, but it differs. I mean, I think we all know that designing M&E frameworks can be a expensive exercise. It can also be, for the partner, a very time-consuming and sometimes overly bureaucratic and difficult exercise for them to take on. So we have sort of a problem-first approach. We look at the engagement and we figure out a solution that's suitable for the project at hand. So I would say there's no size fits all. It's a range. So it goes from a very light sort of in-house system that some of our partners have developed based on scientific verified models that they know of in their space, to actually PhD programs, or PhD projects that have been funded by us as well, to follow a project from start to beginning, from start to end, and measure the full outcome.
Thank you. Moving to you, Jayant. Interesting. I mean, yes, Essilor is a lens company, so vision is obviously something that you guys are very concerned with. But what was sort of the thinking behind kind of getting this multi-stakeholder group to come together to form the Vision Fund? You've got banks, you've got a high net worth philanthropist. It was really nice to see that of all the names you put up there, 5 were AVPN members. So I'm really excited, including James Chen, to see that. But and there'll be more, of course. But why put together this? I mean, what was the thinking behind, and how much did your corporate background or the way you think as a corporate actually influence how Vision Fund came to be together?
Yeah, so for us, actually, we come from the premise that business has a big role to play in the overall socio-economic development. For long, business has been isolated and treated as only companies there to make money and profits. It's high time that businesses have a key role to play, because other than money, we also can bring in talent, resources, knowledge, which will all be good for the social sector. So we've been working on that. So way back in 2018, after running the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust very successfully, when Astrid, the current CEO, came to us and spoke about her vision to start a Vision Catalyst Fund, we were the first ones to jump on board. We said, wow, this is great, because she was talking about bringing people from outside the sector, not just the vision sector, which was tiny, and then working towards building this fund. And so it was the proposal made by Astrid at that time. And then we had the Commonwealth Head of Governments meeting happening in London, which was very opportune in terms of timing. And we all made the announcement there in presence of the royal family and also with Sir John Major and all the other dignitaries and the prime ministers of the Commonwealth countries, all signing up to provide universal eye care. And it was at that meeting where Essilor committed to give 200 million pairs of lenses worth about $1 billion or more uh, over 10 years to help catalyze this whole action. So I think we come from the belief that it's high time that all stakeholders get together, and instead of working in silos, collectively we can be much more stronger and create much more impact.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And now coming last to Kevin, it's really great to see this presentation. I've known Kevin since he moved back to Singapore, and really good to see what you're doing with this. Um, I'd love to hear a little bit from you in terms of, we've been hearing at AVPN how much it's important to measure outcomes, how important it is for all our members that they look at what is sort of the M&E that they do, and most nonprofits are in fear in terms of this M&E and the strictures that it applies. How difficult or how easy has it been in the Asian context to really introduce some of these pay for success models that you've done? And is there a difference that you see when you've done the work in Hong Kong versus the two projects you're looking to do in Singapore?
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps I can use an analogy, which is, Uber was originally used to solve a convenience problem, right, in developed cities in the West. But Grab actually, even though it looks exactly the same as Uber, was used to solve a safety problem, right, in Southeast Asia. So just because the tool is the same, it can actually be used to solve different problems. I think that's what I've seen with many of these tools as well. I think in the West, the origins of the pay for success tool were in a way because government had a budget constraint and then they needed to borrow now to sort of do preventative programs. I think that budget constraint does not exist in Hong Kong, or at least didn't before COVID, but they could still use it for a different reason, and that is participation, innovation, and so on. So a lot of the work I've been doing, and I think half of our work really is I guess I'm a missionary really. We're trying to re-narratize and start from first principles to figure out what is the right role of all these different tools in a very different context. So a lot of the work is that kind of work. Ideas engineering, I guess, and good thing I guess my parents always ask me what I do with a philosophy degree, and I guess this is it. So if any of your kids are thinking about it, here's what happens. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And we have a question that's a follow-up question on that, on Pigeonhole. So it's been directed to you, Kevin, and to you, Jayant. So what are typical return margins or profiles for the guarantees that you talked about and the pay for performance tools? Are we looking at a pure return on capital, or are we looking at a low single-digit return? I saw on one of your slides that for $388,000 outlay, the outcome funder was willing to put back $400,000. So what would you say are the typical returns on capital deployed?
I think it's a really hard one because it really depends on what goal the outcomes funder is trying to achieve, and also what kinds of people it is that they're trying to attract. So I think that there's one school of thought, which is the traditional impact investment school of thought, that we need to give market rate returns to attract this new pool of capital. Right? And so people talk about very high numbers of returns. But actually, there's another school of thought that comes from the other side, where the returns to philanthropy today are negative 100%, right? Mm-hmm. So if I said to a philanthropist, look, you're going to get zero, right? It's not so important whether or not it's 0 or 3 or 5. Actually, the real difference is that I'm giving you back your principal altogether. So I think depending on the kind of people that the government is trying to attract, and what's doing the work in terms of adding all of these new capabilities beyond just money, that rate of return tends to vary. So unfortunately, it sounds like a bit of a hitch answer, but it does tend to depend because I've seen people do this for a variety of reasons.
Jayant, what about you?
I agree with you. I mean, actually, this is very new. We are learning as we are walking. and we are picking up new things, new ideas. So the bond that we are launching with the $6 million with the Vision Entrepreneur Bond, for the impact investors, the returns are compared to market-based returns, and if the performance is even better, they can hope for a better return. So we're trying to make it that attractive for the impact investors to invest in these bonds. We'll see how it goes, and I think there is no right or wrong answer here. And like Kevin said, it could work both ways. So we are getting our feet wet. We'll learn as we go along, and we'll build the whole model.
There's a question here for you, Mete. So you talked about one of the things that you guys have learned in terms of being patient for impact. And I think the question here is, what tips can you share to help manage impatience, especially when you're working with other partners?
Wow. That's a really good question. So I think one of the lessons that we drew from this particular case was that going in, we saw huge potential in terms of building a financially sustainable model for them. The thing is, we went in a 2-year commitment. We are not going to be able to build that case in 2 years' time. As I said, this is a long-term engagement for us to see the actual impact. And so to communicate that to external partners and get their buy-in is hard. It is hard. I think the best way to persuade people is a bit what Kevin was pointing to, finding the second school of thought, finding people who are willing to take a risk, who believe in the model, and then trying to build as much of a case as you can through proxy indicators and other sort of steps to put people at ease, and then just be open about it. I think having an open, honest conversation about what this is, what this looks like long term, is the only thing that you can really do. Patience will be key, and it is hard.
Yep, absolutely. I think this one is for you, Kevin. So how do you convince governments to provide outcome payments for services which can be supported by philanthropic funding?
Yeah, it's a good question. And apart from philosophy, I also did public policy, so that's the other hat. I think from a government perspective, there's a real question of what's the delta, and not just versus philanthropy, but versus subvention, right? Because as a government, actually, I could go borrow on the public bond markets for next to nothing today and fund it directly. So why even engage impact investors altogether? Right? So I think the narrative a lot has to come from, and the value add has to come from innovation. It has to come beyond just money, but also in terms of skills, the human capital, and so on. It's also got to come from bandwidth, because I think no matter how much money government has, it might not have time, right? And there's only so much government can do. I'm actually very excited about doing these tools in a place like Singapore. People always say impact investment is not necessary in Singapore because the state does everything. Actually, I put to everybody that it is the most useful in Singapore because it's where the state has already solved many of the basic problems. And impact investing can play the role that it's probably meant to play, which is as a complement to the state, not as a substitute. So I do see a lot of interesting innovation that's being generated here as a result of that context that actually might be transferable elsewhere in terms of how impact investing eventually plays a role.
What about you, Jayan? In India, did you find it difficult to get outcome funders?
Actually, we didn't find it difficult to get outcome funders. We found it a bit difficult to get investors.
Wow, that's interesting, because normally I've always heard the opposite. People find it easier to find risk funders than they do outcome funders.
Exactly. So that's what I thought when we went
Right.
into it. So we managed to get a lot of outcome funders, but we're still in discussions with investors. I think it's because the idea is still new, and then so you've got to tell them it's probably too good to be true. That I'm giving money, I get returns, market-based returns, probably even better, and I'm going to do good. So where's the catch? So so it's a lot of convincing which we need to actually do with those people. We still haven't got everyone lined up, but I'm hopeful that we'll get everything done pretty soon. But if the size of the bond is too small, $6 million. But,
Right.
when you're talking about $1 billion, then it'll be different.
True, true. I want to bring you in, Mete, on this point. You said the family does play a role in terms of some of the decisions that you make, and the organization chart that you showed us had one family member that was there. How receptive is the family or is it the operating team that needs to decide whether you would, if you did decide to actually invest in one of these innovative kind of instruments?
Well, as you saw on the chart, it's a combination, you could say. So obviously the team, the in-house team, will screen and come up with recommendation. But it's always, the family members are always involved in the decision-making process. And I can say that we are definitely in the second camp, the second school of thought, as a general rule of thumb across the board. So as you said, Kevin, we're looking at engagements that would be 100% grants if it was not done in a more innovative way. So the family is very interested in seeing different innovative giving models that can recycle their funds and make more impact.
Interesting. This is actually, it's great that this question has been asked because I often ask the same question. So I'll start with you, Kevin. How do you pick the issue areas for these pay for success models? Are there certain social issues that are more compatible with certain kinds of social finance models? And I'd love to ask you this question. There cannot be a SIB for every social issue. So how do you decide?
Yeah, it's a great question, and my colleagues and I are actually writing an article that's titled "SIPs can't do everything, and that's okay," right? Because everybody, everybody takes the latest shiny new tool and it's also look. I think there is a place for government subvention. There's a place for traditional grants, and there's a place for things like the social impact bond. When is it worth the effort? I'd say it's with things where actually the problems are really complex. And there is some value add to having philanthropy or private impact investors put their brains together, take on some of the risk, push the provider over time. So that's sort of like the why criteria, right? And then there's another set of how criteria. So these are places where the outcomes are more measurable, where there is some economic benefit to it. So there's a bunch of those things as well. So I think when those two things come together, then it's a good fit. But of course, the impact bond model is not the only one. So you might say, actually, if if the why is there but not the how, then let's find a different how. So I think that's the spectrum of tools. So I think anybody who says let's do one thing and solve all the problems, probably isn't right. But if you have a broad toolkit, I think this is a valuable tool.
Absolutely. And to bring that question to you, Jayan, you talked about the fact that Essilor is, willing to donate up to $1 billion value of lenses. So given that you're willing to do that, and that's a direct way of impacting vision, why go through the pain almost of the $7 million, bond? Why do that? Why not just look at donating the lenses? What prompted you guys to really look at that vision entrepreneur bond?
So there are two things here. One is that the lenses are always available, but you need an infrastructure. You need the whole public health system to work for the lenses to be available and to be accessible, which is not there. To do that, you need entrepreneurs, primary vision care providers, you need access creation and awareness. So that Essilor can't do it alone. And when you have a problem which is the world's largest disability, you need to work with partners. The impact bond, like Kevin said, is one of the toolkits. And this is a very, very nascent world. We are learning every single day. So this is a trial we are doing, $6 million. I can tell you the cost of creating the impact bond is very, very high. And for 6 million, you can't even amortize the whole cost in the bond. But we're not looking at it at this point in time. We are looking at it purely as an investment, because if it works, we can take it up to 60, 600 or whatever. But that will be one of the many things that we will do and which we will learn and work together. And that's why we are talking with Trisector right now, and not just looking at the three models Kevin presented. He's got thousands of more models in his mind, and we're trying to see what else can we do together. So that's the whole plan.
Interesting. There's a question for you, Mette, in terms of why the decision to base yourself in Singapore, and what projects, if any, are you excited about in this area? What differences do you see between your partnerships in Denmark and those in Southeast Asia?
First of all, we're based in Singapore because, as I mentioned, two of our family members are based in Asia. They're based in Thailand, and for structuring reasons, we have preferred to set up shop in Singapore. So our entire setup is here, and for that reason, philanthropy is here as well. But the vehicles that we operate out of Singapore have a strong focus on Thailand and the broader region. We also do philanthropy in Singapore. We are currently building the pipeline. The foundation that we have set up is just from August last year, so it's still very much sort of at the sourcing stage. And we have one commitment right now that we're quite excited about in the plastic space, which is a social enterprise that we are supporting a bit in a lighter version of what I shared with you earlier, but still quite intensive in terms of sparring, and where we are able to bring in some of our investment competences to spar with them as well on their journey towards becoming investable. So that's quite exciting. I would say in terms of, I mean, the social space is different, obviously, but it's different between all the geographies that we work in. Singapore is, it seems to be, compared to Denmark, it seems to be a very sort of very small grassroots space, or a lot of well-established organizations with government support. And so we're still sort of trying to figure out where we fit into this equation and where we can add the most value. But a lot of competent partners out there for sure. And we are, as I said, we're still sort of in the scoping pipeline stage. And we just wanna be aware of our contribution as well, and where we can add the most value.
Thank you. Question here for you, Jayant, which I think is a really important one, especially in light of the pandemic. So how do you ensure continued prioritization of vision-related issues amongst all your stakeholders in order to achieve the goal, especially in light of what we've gone through and, you know, competing priorities at this time? How would you do that?
Well, that's a very difficult one. I mean, when you are talking about the key stakeholders are the governments, because they're the ones who really make things happen. And rightly so, today, most governments in the world are focused on fighting the pandemic, and most of the health departments are working on that. So, and sadly, some of the other issues have taken a back seat. We have backlogs in the hospitals, you have backlogs at various other things, other people with diseases not being operated, etc., etc. And this is going to be huge. So vision is also in the pecking order. It's probably not very high because it's not life-threatening, and it's something which people think that it can wait. So I think it's a difficult one. We just make sure that vision doesn't drop off the radar. So we keep talking to the government officials. We keep making our case. We keep talking about the benefits that vision can bring, and the importance and the low investment, high reward which vision can bring, so that it always remains on the radar. And hopefully, when the pandemic goes away, governments will continue to spend the same amount of money, and more allocation will happen to the vision care. From a corporate side, we do much more than what we would have done normally, so that at least we can make up for the loss of action on the other fronts.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, so I'm going to be taking the moderator's choice and answering the one question that was directed towards me. How can AVPN support impact entrepreneurs who are new in their journey, who may be just transitioning from corporates, and how do we actually support them in the network? Well, I think our goal is to really look at how do we grow this ecosystem. So we're very excited to support new impact entrepreneurs. If there are new enterprises you're looking to start, do get in touch with us. We run a deal share platform where we can actually highlight them to our members who are investors, who are funders, who are philanthropists. If you're looking to join and get experience in the sector, come on our website. There are lots of jobs that are advertised. Mette just told you about a couple of opportunities in her family office that she's recruiting for. If there's, you want to get trained in different kinds of what's happening, what are new trends, what are new sort of initiatives, how do you actually measure impact, look up our academy. There are courses for everyone that you can possibly join. So lots of ways that AVPN can actually help support your journey from the dark side to the light side. So on that note, I'd like to say a very, very warm thank you to my three panelists. This is great to actually have you come and join us. And as a gesture of our appreciation, I'd like to just present you something really small. Here you go. Here. So much. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us. Back to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Naina. And we have come to the end of our session. A huge thank you to our speakers for sharing their valuable insights and to you, our audience, for being with us here today. Before we leave, just like to highlight two upcoming events that AVPN will be holding: Impact Frontiers Asia Info Session on March 30th and establishing a family office in Singapore on May 6th. Do approach any AVPN staff if you're interested. And with that, a gentle reminder that this is one-way traffic, so please exit at the front of the auditorium. And good night, and look forward to our next engagement. In the meantime, drink lots of orange juice.